Today we'll be going over Unit 2, Lesson 2, Natural Selection, Explorations 1, and part of Exploration 2. Pages 94 through 101. A manta ray uses long fins on each side of its head to funnel tiny organisms into its mouth. The adaptation helps manta rays gather enough food to support their large size. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain the link between adaptation and natural selection. On page 94, two manta rays. These fins right here are the fins that they're talking about that filter food into their mouths. Can you explain it? How has the smell of rotting flesh become an adaptation for the Rafflesia flower? Rafflesia flowers smell like rotting flesh, attracting flies and other insect pollinators. So question 1 is asking, flowers of many plants produce scents. A flower can be sweet, fruity, musty, or spicy. How do you think having a specific flower scent benefits a plant? Well, certain pollinators are attracted to different kinds of scents. So like a bee and a butterfly, they're more attracted to sweet-smelling things. So flowery, sweet, strong odors, kind of like that are a little bit sweeter in nature because bees use that sugar to make honey. Whereas like insects like flies and beetles are more attracted to gross smelling things that kind of have a really gross odor. So things that smell kind of musty or rotting, because that's what they eat, is rotting and dead, decaying things typically. So that will attract those kind of pollinators. So depending on where the flower lives and what pollinators it needs to survive will determine what it's going to smell like. So like this Rafflesia flower, it lives in an area where there's more beetles and flies. Turn the page. Exploration 1, relating genetic variation to the distribution of traits. The three-toed sloth and the nine-banded armadillo look very different from each other, but they share a common ancestor that lived millions of years ago. Genetic change over many generations resulted in these two species. Three-toed sloths have strong arms and sharp claws, adaptations that allow them to live in trees. Armor-like plates provide protection for armadillos, which live on the forest floor. How did these adaptations arise? Evolution is the change in the inherited traits of a population over many generations. On a small scale, evolution leads to adaptations of a population and its environment. On a large scale, evolution leads to the amazing diversity of life on Earth. But in order for evolution to occur, populations must have genetic variation. So to question 2, construct an explanation to describe how the two species might have evolved from a common ancestor. Include the words mutation, adaptation, and environmental factors in your explanation. So you have a three-toed sloth and the nine-banded armadillo. And so these both obviously have eyes and ears and spines and 4 limbs. So those kinds of things would mean that they could potentially have a common ancestor, except for that ancestor would have gotten separated, and one would have been living in the trees because of some reason, and one would have been stuck to the forest floor for whatever reason. And over time, mutations would have happened that would have made each of these animals better to survive in their environment. And not always is it a mutation. Sometimes it's just a trait that pops up. But that mutation, usually it's a mutation that leads to an adaptation, and that adaptation then leads to the better survival of that organism in its environment, and then it changes into a new organism. And those are all dependent on what environmental factors are in that area. So like an armadillo needs more protective covering because it's on the forest floor. It needs something to protect itself. So it evolved that adaptation of that protective covering, whereas the three-toed sloth has sharp claws and fur to help it blend in and climb trees. So that's an adaptation that would have happened as a result of its environmental factors. So variation in populations. All organisms of the same species that live in the same geographical area make up a population. So like all the lions in an area. Variation refers to the differences between organisms in a population. So like one lion might be tan, one lion might be more of a yellowish color, one lion might be more darker brown. That's an example of variation. This variation can be differences in physical features, can be differences in behaviors, or any other characteristic that is measurable that we can look or evaluate. Genetic variation refers to the different types of genes in a population for an inherited characteristic, such as flower color or tail length. For evolution to occur in a population, there must be genetic variation in some of the traits present in the population. Genetic variation can be introduced in a population through gene mutations and the movement of individuals through populations. It can also be introduced by new combinations of genes formed during the process of sexual reproduction, where you have two parents. We are on page 97. So calculate the allele frequency. So allele frequencies, different forms of a gene are called alleles. Biologists study how populations evolve by measuring allele frequencies. An allele frequency is a measurement of how common a certain allele is in a population. So it's the number of that allele over the total number of potential alleles in the population. Evolution occurs when an allele frequency changes in a population from one generation to the next. So one generation, one allele might be more common, but then in the next generation, it's a different allele that's more common. Mongolian gerbils can be agouti, brown, or black, depending on the combination of alleles they inherit for fur color. The combination of inherited alleles is called a genotype. This is the genes that the organism would inherit from both parents. The phenotype would then determine the organism's phenotype, which is its physical characteristics, so what we actually see. So, such as fur color. So, like the genotype for blue eyes, there is more than one allele for eye color. There's an allele for brown eyes, there's only an allele for blue eyes, green, and then if you get a green and a blue, so you get green from one parent and blue from another, that can give you hazel. So there's more than one type of allele for eye color, and those alleles are the genotypes. So like we usually represent these with the capital or lowercase letter. Capital letter if it's the dominant trait, lowercase letter if it's a recessive trait. So for the gerbils, brown color is dominant over black. So brown would be represented by the capital A allele, and black would be represented by the lowercase a allele because it's recessive. So genotype would be the combination of letters that you would inherit from your parents. So like you might get the A allele from one parent, but then a big A for dominant for brown fur, and you might get the little a from the other parent for black fur. So then your organism would have the genotype capital A, lowercase a. And its phenotype would be brown fur because the dominant trait always shows up. So then it just wants you to go through and like figure out the allele combinations. We're not going to do this. We're just going to skip this part. But I want to answer question 5 on the bottom. Mongolian gerbils are prey for sharp-eyed hawks. If a wildfire blackens a landscape, the frequency of getting that lowercase a allele, that recessive trait for black fur, will it increase or decrease due to the brown allele, that capital A? And the answer would be it would increase because now your environment's changed. So now your population's going to change to be able to survive better in that environment. Turn the page. Distribution of traits. Genetic variation causes differences in traits. Some traits may have only one or two possible phenotypes. Other traits may have a wide range of possible phenotypes. For example, wild lupine flowers can be purple, white, blue, violet, or purple-pink. The frequency of each flower color in a lupine population can be shown in a graph. This type of graph shows the distribution of different phenotypes for each flower color trait. So in the graph, it shows the distribution of flower color for a population of wild lupines. Biologists might compare this graph with one made in the past to study how flower color in the lupine population may be changing. So they're going to go to different areas and count how many flowers had a specific color. And then they're going to record that color, that number of plants on their chart. So question 6 asks you, study the distribution graph for wild lupines. Which statement could be defended using the data? A, the population has only one allele for flower color. B, conditions in the environment favor purple lupines. C, all flower color alleles have an equal chance of appearing in the next lupine generation. Or D, there are fewer pink and white lupines due to drought. So there's the chart. So you can see that the white on the very end, and then pink, purple in the middle, and then blue on the other end. So the question, when A would say that the population would only have one allele for flower color. That's not correct, because if you only have one allele, you're only going to have one color. So like if you have a white allele, you're only going to get white flowers. So A would be wrong because we have 4 different colors in our graph. B, conditions in the environment favor purple lupines. Well, if you look at this graph, we have a ton of purple lupines. So, and that's at the peak of our graph. So that would be supported. So B is the correct answer. C, all flower alleles have an equal chance. No, because as you can see in this graph, like there's not very many pink. There's not very much white. There's not very much blue, but there's a ton of purple. So that's not supported by our evidence. So C is incorrect. And then D, there are fewer pink and white blue pines due to drought. You can see in the graph that there's less white and pink than other colors, than like the purple, but we don't know the reason for that necessarily. So, describe trait distribution. Monkey flowers are found in a variety of colors ranging from white to pink to red. Animals such as bees and hummingbirds help these plants reproduce by transferring pollen as they travel from flower to flower. Hummingbirds prefer to visit red monkey flowers. Bumblebees prefer to visit pink monkey flowers. What do you think the distribution of color in monkey flowers would look like in a habitat that has a large population of bees and few hummingbirds? Well, the answer to that would be, if you have more bees, you're going to have more pink flowers because that's what the environment supports. Where you're still going to have some red because you do have some hummingbirds, but you're not going to have mostly red or half and half because you have mostly bees. Page 99. Exploration 2, modeling natural selection. The distribution of traits in a population can change over time. Sometimes, a sudden change in an environment can cause a change of distribution of traits in a random way. For example, after wildfire, there might randomly be mostly blue flowers in a lupine population. Other distribution changes are not due to chance and may be predicted using evidence. For example, a newly arrived butterfly population prefers to pollinate white lupine. It is reasonable to predict that lupine color will shift towards white in future generations. So number 9 asks, the conehead katydid is an insect that can be either brown or green in color. They are eaten by a variety of predators, including birds, bats, and lizards. What are some random factors that might change the distribution of the two phenotypes? What are some non-random factors that might change the distribution? So that top insect is the picture. Some things to consider. Catastrophic events might cause a random change, like a drought, a flood, hurricane that would change the environment around it. Some non-random factors would be like enhanced camouflage for one color over the other if the environment changes. So like if you would just have a random event happen, like a hurricane, you can't predict those necessarily 100%. I mean, you can't predict like 10 years out that there's going to be a hurricane that's going to change the environment. So that would be a random instance. But if you all of a sudden, like you have over years, like the trees are getting darker or turning more brown, then your insects are going to turn more brown because your trees are turning brown. So that's a non-random factor. Natural selection. Genetic variation determines the traits possible in a population. However, a population's current environment determines if any of those traits provide advantages or disadvantages. For example, the ability for the horned lizard to squirt toxic blood from its eyes helps the lizard avoid becoming a meal for a coyote. However, a coyote with very strong legs might be able to run fast enough to attack the lizard by surprise. Natural selection is a process by which a population's environment determines which traits are beneficial and which are not. Evolution by natural selection occurs in populations, not individuals. Individuals with traits that are advantageous in an environment are better able to survive and reproduce. These traits get passed on more often to the next generation than less helpful traits. Evolution occurs as a population's genes or their frequencies change over time. While evolution can occur by several different processes, natural selection is the only non-random cause of evolution. This horned lizard has poisonous, foul-smelling blood that it squirts out of its eyes as a defense against predators. My book would cooperate. So this, and that's the blood. Turn the page. So pages 100 and 101 are a lab that we are not completing because we are not in school, so we can close our books. Your assignment today is doing animal comparison number 1. So I have a chart that you will need to fill in, and I've given you things you should need on the bottom of the page, so make sure you scroll down. There will be pictures of different animals from the movie, The Lion King. You will just have to pick 5 animals. I don't need their scientific names. So if you pick the lion, you just need to write lion, okay? If you don't know the name of a beetle, just put beetle and then tell me what colors it is underneath it so I know which one you're talking about. I also included on the very, very bottom of the of the document, a picture of the symmetry, bilateral, radial, and asymmetrical, in case you've forgotten what those are. So make sure you complete that document. It is on Google Classroom for you, as well as the due date.